Um, my name is Kate Kirkwood, and I am happy to be here today to present to you a little bit of information about Senate Bill 247. Hasn't this been an amazing conference? I'm just really enjoying hearing from the folks who are making this happen in the state of New Hampshire. As I think you heard, these are all being recorded. So if you miss something, you are certainly going to be able to take a look at it later, and I hope that you all will. I know I'm looking forward to seeing the presentations that are in a different breakout session right now from this one, once we are able to do that. So also, please visit the exhibits. I was just doing that earlier during our networking session, and people have great information. I think it's really helpful to know that there's information out there from all of these partners that are here today. And it's exciting news about the grants that we have. We have just been awarded another $10 million in New Hampshire to help take care of this problem. And a big part of where we will spend that money has to do with our lead law, which is Senate Bill 247. So let me jump right into that. My background is I'm a trainer and an educator. So I teach these classes. I teach lead abatement contractor classes and renovate, repair, and paint classes. I've been knocking around the lead world since the early 2000s when a child died. Some of you may know this story. A child died in Manchester, New Hampshire. I'm actually going to talk more about that in my second presentation, which is a parent's 5-step guide to lead poisoning, and that will happen after this one. So now let's dive into the law and talk about what the legal issues really are in New Hampshire. So Senate Bill 247, Beverly talked a bit about in her presentation this morning. It was a legislation that was passed now a year and a half, almost 2 years ago. And its purpose, obviously, is to prevent childhood lead poisoning. It definitely was a major step forward in that regard. But there are a number of stakeholders in this issue. And how it affects you, how Senate Bill 247 affects you, really depends on who you are. And what constituency you have. So there's a lot of us who are affected, right? We all wear many hats. So I might define myself as a parent, an educator, a lead abatement contractor, whatever it is that we do. I'm also a landlord. So whatever it is that we do and whatever hats we wear, we are humans first. Right. And I think one of the ways that we value and sort of define the integrity, the humanity, the concern of our society is how we treat our most vulnerable citizens. In this case, the children who are too young to do anything for themselves. So whatever your focus is, and we're going to cover all the different focuses here in the next half hour, whatever your focus is, bear in mind that the purpose of this law was to protect these vulnerable kids. Now, if it has an effect on you along the way, let's try to decipher what that is and talk a little bit about it. All right, so first, what does the law say? Well, the big key point is it calls for universal testing of all kids at age 1 and age 2. If you just heard Charlene and Don talk about their experience in Claremont, you heard Beverly talk about the experience nationwide and statewide. And what we find is that most children in New Hampshire were not being tested. In fact, if we look back over the last 5 or 10 years, we tested maybe 15, 16% of our kids in New Hampshire, which is really appalling, particularly when we look at surrounding states, where in Maine and Massachusetts and Vermont, they test 76, 78, 82% of their kids. And here we are testing 15, that's 15%. So we hired some people, did some work on, got together a commission, Senate Bill 135 a few years back, pulled together a commission to work on this problem. And eventually it was decided that in order for us to really make a move here and increase testing, we needed to legislate it. And so that's what happened. Senate Bill 247 was passed, and it said that all children will now be tested at their well child visit when they are 1 and 2 years old. So at age 1 and 2, these kids are being taken to the doctor for their normal well child visit, and the parent suddenly is being told, we're going to test your child for lead. Well, as you've just heard from Charlene, many people think this is an old problem. This is a problem we resolved years ago. And so they're surprised to hear that the child is going to be tested now. And so that's an education point right there, right? And that's huge for parents. And also it affects contractors, it affects landlords, and the rest of the lead population. And I'll explain why as we go along. Unless the parent opts out in writing, the child will be tested at age 1 and age 2. So suddenly, before this, we were identifying 500-600 kids maybe that had elevated blood lead levels in the state. Now, that was when we were testing 15%, 16%. So what's that number going to look like when we start testing 80, 90, 100% of these kids? We don't really know, but it's going to be a large number, and it's going to throw this whole lead industry into another level, right? And it also, once we test the kids, now we know what the problem is. So now we know which kids we have to focus on, and we know how many there are, and the parents and the doctors and the landlords can all find out maybe when a child's level is still really low, before we've done permanent damage, before we've actually poisoned the child, right? So the first step is testing. If we don't test, we don't know. We don't know what the problem is if we don't identify the problem. And also the law said that insurers must pay for the testing. So that's helpful as well. The second provision of the law is it agrees to lower the notification level. So in most of the country for the last decade or so, 10 has been kind of an average level of poisoning. And happy to talk with you later about what that number means. But just say 10 micrograms per deciliter has kind of been the standard, even though CDC has been telling us for years it should be 5. 10 is too high. Kids are already in trouble by 10. They already have learning disabilities. They already have permanent brain damage. But that's been our standard. And it was our standard here in New Hampshire as well, until Senate Bill 247. But what we always did was we notified, for the last several years, we notified parents when kids were getting close to that level. So between 5 and 9.9, we wouldn't do anything. We wouldn't consider the kid poisoned. We wouldn't put the property under order, but we would give the parents a notification, and the landlords and the doctors a notification that, hey, that kid has an elevated level, maybe not elevated enough that we're going to take action yet, but this should be a big flashing yellow light for you. This should let you know that it's time to do something, right? Because the child's level is climbing. So this level of notification was reduced by Senate Bill 247. Instead of notifying starting at 5, we now notify starting at 3 micrograms per deciliter, which gives everybody a little bit more time to get in there and fix this problem before the kid suffers serious and permanent harm. And that's our hope, that we will be able to make a difference earlier. Unfortunately, one of the things that happens sometimes, particularly with a landlord situation, as Beverly said, we don't go in and force abatement in a privately owned property. If a homeowner lives there and it's their children, we make recommendations, we educate, but we don't force that process of abatement. However, in a rental property, we do. Whether it's a rented single family home or a rented apartment building, we force abatement. So that when the process becomes under order and abatement is forced, that level was for many years 10. And notifying at 3 or at 5 was helpful to let the landlord know, hey, you should get in there and do something. Unfortunately, sometimes those letters would go out and they would say, you have a child in 123 Main Street that has an elevated level, but we're not taking any action because the level's not high enough. So there's a great tendency then for the property owner to say, dodge that bullet, right? I'm glad they weren't higher. And to just not really think about this as a problem, when in fact, it's meant to be a warning. It's meant to be a chance to jump in there and do something. So hopefully lowering this level to 3, giving us more time, is helpful in terms of getting those properties made lead safe before the child actually has a significant problem. The other thing that it did is this law reduced the number of units that the Department of Health and Human Services was going to inspect. So if you had a 10-unit building, let's say, you have a child in unit number 1 that has an elevated level, the state would come in and they would test the paint in unit number 1. And if they find lead hazards, before this, they had the right to go into all your other apartments in that building. So they might get, 9 other apartments, and all of them might go in under order at once. And the property owner would have to suddenly abate all 10 units. Now we've amended that to say that we're only going to inspect units where children under 6 are living or pregnant women. So this gives the property owner an opportunity to address the high risk. In fact, it forces them to address the high risk properties, but gives them some time to work on the other units that might be vacant or might have older children or senior citizens or whatever that living in a less vulnerable population might be living there. We could wait and give them a little more time to address that unit. So again, these are attempts to help the landlords to comply, giving us more time and more space. The other thing that Senate Bill 247 did, which is huge in New Hampshire, is it has lowered the blood lead level. So the level at which we are considering a child poisoned, which used to be 10, dropped last year to 7.5. So our current level of concern or level of poisoning is 7.5 micrograms per deciliter. In July of 2021, that level will drop to 5. So think a little bit about what's just happened here. We are increasing the number of children tested dramatically. We're going from testing 15, 16, 20% maybe at a maximum in the last few years to testing every kid twice, once at 1 year and once at 2 year. And we're lowering the level at which we will take action. How is that going to impact the number of children poisoned in the state? We don't know the exact numbers yet. We're still figuring it out, but I can tell you that we are gearing up. You just heard that we brought a bunch of new grant money into the state. The Department of Health and Human Services is adding staff, adding inspectors, adding nurse case management folks. So we get to a point where we are ready for this whole new group of children who were not considered poisoned before, who will be now, who will be identified. Not that they weren't sick already, but they will now be identified. Right. And so this phase-in approach gives us a little bit of time, but we are coming to the end of that rope in the next 6 months or 8 months. As Beverly said, there is a loan program. The grant programs are terrific. You can get up to $10,000, $11,000 per unit to abate. And also you can get now on top of that, zero interest loan money. It is not only zero interest, but it's also deferred. So you don't have to make payments on this loan until you sell the property. You can get, it really depends, it's income based, but you can get many thousands of dollars depending on your situation, whether you're owner occupied or you're rented. This really can help to take care of the cost. And by the way, I get asked all the time about the cost. HUD says on average, it varies a little bit, but $10,000, $11,000 per unit to abate. So for example, if you had a 3-unit building and you got put under order, meaning that there was a child with an elevated level high enough that they're considered poison, it's a level of action, and there's chipping, peeling, flaking paint. There are hazards in your units. You got put under order. You get a visit from the nurse case manager, visits the family, the investigator, environmentalist visits the property owner and identifies whether there are hazards in the unit. Presumably there are, or the child would not have this level, right? So once you're put under order, you get a thick package from the state, certified mail, it gives you all the laws, and it tells you that the first thing you have to do is hire a risk assessor. So you hire a risk assessor, lead inspector to come in and do a full inspection. And this includes all the lab work, dust samples, soil samples, and very thorough investigation, inside, outside. And what we find is the cost for that, you could estimate about $1,500 a unit just for the inspections. And that will vary a little bit depending on the size of the building and so forth, but it's in that neighborhood. And you may not pay all of that at once, but there'll be an initial inspection, then there'll be inspections as the work goes on, and there'll be a final clearance inspection. So let's say it's $4,500 or so for that 3-family, $5,000 to make the math easy, right? And then HUD says an extra $10,000 or $11,000 to actually abate, and that only includes the interior of the property. So now we still have to account for the exterior. So it is easy. You can do this math. It's easy for a 3-family home to get up to $50,000 in abatement costs. It may not surprise you to know that the owners of a lot of these little 3-family rental units don't have a spare $50,000 sitting in the bank waiting for this kind of thing to happen. So what ends up happening primarily is there's a big scramble to cover the cost of this. And you don't have a lot of time. Once the state puts you under order, you must take action within 90 days. By the way, the fines for not doing this, the fines for going ahead and renting apartments that are under order or doing work yourself can be as high as $1,000 per unit per day. This is a significant problem. You can't ignore this, right? So a property owner, they can't evict the tenant if, because of the lead poisoning. But let's say the tenant decides to move. The family says, this is not a safe place for my child. I have to get out of here. And they go. And in the little three family situation, how long do you suppose it takes before the other two tenants hear about what's happening? Maybe they all go. But in any case, if the tenants leave, you cannot rent that apartment again while it's under order. You can't rent it at all, not to adults. You can't rent it. So you have to keep it off the rental market until the abatement is done. So how long do you suppose these, small property owners survive when they don't have any money coming in on the property and they have to pay the mortgage every month? So this can be a huge problem. And acknowledging this, Senate Bill 247 made it possible for property owners to get these kinds of loans. So this is really a game changer and a lifesaver for a lot of property owners. And I'm happy to talk to you more about that. One of the things my company does is intake for this program. If you go to our exhibit booth, you'll see some brochures about the program, and happy to answer questions later about that. Okay, another provision of Senate Bill 247 is it requires private schools and licensed daycare providers to test for lead in the water. This really just filled a hole in existing law. We already have laws about the school testing for water, but the private schools and daycares were kind of left out of this. So we just filled it with this particular law. Another big change is if you are renovating an old commercial building, say a mill building or a factory, and you're turning it into apartments. This law says, not yet, but after July 1st of 2024, before you make that transition, you have to have a lead safe certification inspection done. So the way it is now, you could renovate into apartments and you might have to get certification on those apartments later that they're lead safe. But what we're saying here is new projects beginning after July 1st, 2024, you get your lead safe certificate before you even start the renovation. So getting a lead safe certificate on a huge old mill building could be costly, right? So we're letting people sort of finish their projects in the pipeline and giving you a few years to gear up for that and put that in your budget. So another thing is that this requires DHHS to test for water anytime a child is poisoned in the unit. So you heard about this earlier from both Claremont and from the folks at the state, from Beverly and Katie. What we know is we've been doing this now for, I don't know, a year and a half, 2 years maybe. Every time a child is poisoned, they are actually also testing the water as well as the paint and dust in the house. And what we've learned is, although sometimes we find lead in the water, it is not a significant reason for lead poisoning in New Hampshire. Even in Flint, the numbers, we got a lot of press out of Flint, and that was a wonderful thing because it opened people's eyes. But the numbers are not huge. In the whole Flint debacle over, I don't know, 3 years or so, there were 300, 400 kids poisoned. We poison more than that every year in New Hampshire based on the dust in the homes. So I'm not saying lead in water is not a problem. I'm just saying it's not the big problem. The big problem is dust. And it's not paint chips, it's dust. So what happens is people think when you start talking about lead paint, oh, those kids are chewing on the windowsill, or they're pulling those chips of paint off the wall and gnawing on them. I have seen that a couple of times in the hundreds of families I've met now with lead poisoned kids, but it is rare. By far, the majority of the time, what happens is the deteriorated paint in the house causes dust. So if you can imagine the old windowsills, right? The old window wells where we are, we're opening and closing those old wooden windows every day, open, close over many years. Pretty soon the paint wears off. The paint between the sash and the window jamb area, it just wears off and there's no paint left there at all. So what we see is bare wood a lot of the time. So where did that paint go? I mean, it's lead. It's a heavy metal. It didn't disappear. The tiny, tiny little bits of paint that come off of that friction, we call that a friction surface. We have two big areas of concern, right? Friction surfaces and impact surfaces. So that's a friction surface. Another friction surface might be a door that when you open and close it rubs against the casing, or steps that you cause friction with your feet as you walk up those steps, or porch floors, or baseboards that you bang into with a toy or the leg of a piece of furniture, chair rails that you bang into with your chairs, stairwells that you hit with the couch as you're moving furniture in. All of these things are friction surfaces, right? When we have a friction surface and little bits of paint come off of that surface, they're heavy. Typically, lead dust is heavy and it falls down to the floor. If we made a big lead mess in this apartment by cutting, scraping, sanding, renovating, or even just living, moving a bunch of things around in the house, and then we stopped and we waited for an hour. At the end of the hour, that lead dust would all have fallen out of the air and it would be sitting on the horizontal surfaces, the counters, the tabletops, the floor. The majority of the lead dust, if you have a lead problem in your house, the majority of the lead dust will be on the floor. And I have to tell you, when I say dust, I don't mean big hunks of debris rolling around your house. I'm not suggesting that people are terrible housekeepers and so there's all this junk on their floors. It's actually too small to see. In fact, if I told you the amount of lead that it takes to poison a child is smaller than a grain of sugar, you get a picture that that's really small, right? The truth of the matter is a hunk of lead dust, a piece of lead dust the size of a grain of sugar is enough to poison 10 children. This is tiny, tiny stuff. We're talking about something really, in most cases, too small to see. So the lead dust settles down. Let's say most of it ends up in the window well, the window trough, right? Then we close that window, and that's what we call an impact surface. We slam that window down into that little trough area over and over and over, and we beat these little pieces up into even smaller pieces. Then one day we open the window and the warm air blows in from the outside. And where is that lead dust now? So it scatters throughout the house. It's very difficult for us to find. And then I'm going to talk more about this in my next presentation on children, parents and children. But let's say there's a newborn in that house. We can't carry the newborn every minute of every day, and we can't leave them in their cribs all the time. So where do we put them? We lay a blanket down on the floor and we put them on the floor. Well-meaning, loving parents put these children in the worst possible place with regard to lead dust in our house. They just don't know. So the infant has nothing to do but lie there on the floor breathing in this dust. Now, there's only two ways children get poisoned, really, right? Ingestion, inhalation. They breathe it, they eat it. So that child gets a little bit older, and pretty soon they start to crawl. And now they're on their hands and knees and they're working their way around the house. And maybe they're in the carpet and maybe they're in the back corners. Maybe they're crawling around under the furniture. And what is going on with their hands, right? Their hands are now covered with this little tiny bit of invisible lead dust. And what do children do with their hands? We call it hand to mouth behavior, right? In the mouth, in the mouth, in the mouth. And not just their hands, but also their sippy cup, their pacifier, their cookie, their snacks, everything on that floor can be contaminated with lead dust. While I was having this conversation with a set of parents recently, I watched a young dad pick up the infant and put them in the crib, and then pick up from underneath the crib obviously the child's favorite teddy bear, shake the dust off the bear, and then give that bear to the toddler to snuggle into and go to sleep. What do you suppose is trapped in the stuffed animal hair? This lead dust is insidious. It's very difficult for us to see and to locate. So what happens here in New Hampshire, as everywhere, is the culprit, the big problem is not water, really, it is dust. So certainly we should test the water. And in fact, Senate Bill 247 says that if we find lead in the water, the landlord will put a filter on the kitchen sink. So we're talking, $50 or so, right? Not a huge cost, but important to know that that's the process, right? That's what we're required to do. Okay, so another provision of Senate Bill 247 is it requires that we alter the real estate disclosure forms in New Hampshire. And I have to say, I'm not a real estate expert. I don't know the exact language that we have arrived at, if we've even finished this process yet. But I will say that what we have known historically is there are three options for a landlord or a real estate agent or a property owner. If they're selling a property and they have to disclose what they know, they can check off, yes, I know there's lead. No, there is not lead. I had it tested and I know there's not, or I don't know. So what do you suppose 90% of folks will say? I don't know. And that's fine. The situation is, though, that it really gives us it does not give us much opportunity to identify, where there is lead if people are saying they don't know. So I anticipate that this federal disclosure form is going to change a little bit to say houses of a certain age, we assume that there's lead. Maybe there's not, but we assume that there is, right? So that will give people at least the heads up that they should have the property tested. All right. So how does Senate Bill 247 affect you? It really depends, again, on who you are. So I'm going to wrap this up in the next 5 or 10 minutes here because I'm going to be out of time, but I also will be happy to take questions either here or later on in the exhibit hall or after this fact. I'm going to give you my contact information in just a minute. If you are a parent, know this. Your child will be tested now. Unless you say, I don't want them to be, your child will be tested at age 1 and age 2. Do not accept a vague answer. People will say to you, oh yeah, your child is fine. No. Ask for a number. You're an educated parent now. You need to advocate for your child. In New Hampshire, the child is not considered poisoned until 7.5. That means your child could have a level of 7, be within the guidelines, and the practitioner could tell you your child is okay. They're within the guidelines, right? They're not considered poisoned. But CDC has considered children poisoned over a level of 5 for several years now. I would be concerned if it were my child and the level were higher than 3. All right. So you want to get tested yourself. Parents, you should be tested yourself, and also your children should be tested. And do not assume that just because you live in a newer home, you're okay. Again, I'll talk more about this in my next session, but there are a number of children every year that are poisoned that live in new homes. As a matter of fact, if you go to my website, leadpaintclearandsimple.com, that's all one word, leadpaintclearandsimple.com, one of the first things that pops up is a TED Talk, which I did on this topic. The title of the talk is called Why You Should Worry About Lead Poisoning in a New Home. This is not just an older home problem. We can bring lead in and poison children without even knowing that that's what we're doing. So ask what your child will be tested regardless of the age of your home. And when you get the result of that test, ask what that number is. All right. And if you have questions, you can feel free to reach out to us. But the folks at the Department of Health and Human Services and here in Nashua, the folks in the Nashua Childhood Lead Program are phenomenal. They will be able to answer all your questions. Also, Google is a wonderful thing. There's so much information on the internet. I've written a couple of books about this, and one of them is a parent's 5-step guide to lead poisoning. That's what I'm going to talk about in the next session. It's available on Amazon. I think it's, $7 or $8 for a hard copy and like $3 for the Kindle version, maybe not even that much. It's got some really great information. There's lots of places to get good information. Find out about this and why we're worried about it. I'm going to skip over landlords for a minute and come back to that. Contractors. If you're a lead abatement contractor or even just a general renovation contractor, you are running into lead. I mean, we are one of the oldest, we're one of the original 13 colonies. We have the oldest housing stock in the country. If you have a house built before 1940, 9 out of 10 of them have lead paint. 9 out of 10. That's the majority of the housing stock in New Hampshire. Right. So this is why communities like Claremont, I'm so excited that Sullivan County just was able to get this grant funding. This is a community that's been working on this for many years. And what they know is they have old housing stock. Some of it is not well maintained, and they have a number of children that haven't been tested. That's a dangerous combination. Contractors, if you don't have lead safe certification training, you need to get it right away. Right now, you cannot disturb paint in a house built before 1978 unless you're RRP certified. That's renovate, repair, and paint. That's not just contractors. That's landlords, it's maintenance folks, it's anyone who disturbs paint in a house built before 1978 for compensation. If it's your own private home, you can do whatever you want. But if it's your rental property, your summer home, your investment property, if you're doing work for someone who is paying you, and by the way, compensation doesn't have to be cash, right? Sometimes people work off their rent or whatever. If you're getting paid in any way for disturbing that paint, then this law affects you. And it's a one-day certification. It's not very expensive. And I'll tell you, it's a lot cheaper than the fines for not having it. if you get caught. Frequently there's grant funding. Right now, if you're in Stratford County, there's a free program. Go to my exhibit booth right here. We have $50 off for anybody who registers for any class today, anytime. But also we have a couple of free classes still left. So go see Samantha in the exhibit hall. She'll tell you, if you can't get into one of these, ask around in your community. Frequently there are classes that are funded. But even if you have to pay, it's a couple $100. It's not a lot. And you're certified for 5 years. And the certification is national. So please go out there and get certified. There's a lot of different trainers. I'm not trying to drive you just to our program, but please get certified. Once you are certified, contractors, bear in mind that these these parents who are at the doctor's office getting this new education when they get their 1-year-old and 2-year-old tested, they're learning about lead. One of the things it says in the brochures and the paperwork that they get from the doctor's office is, if you hire somebody to do renovation on your house, make sure they have this lead certification. So you're going to get asked, if you haven't been already, you're going to start hearing this. We are doing education at the doctor's office that was never done before to all of these parents. Every 1-year-old, every 2-year-old, we have about 100,000 kids under the age of 6 in New Hampshire. This is big business. So contractors, I would encourage you to get this certification if you haven't got it already. And then once you have certified your firm, your company with EPA, you will get permission to use the EPA and HUD logos on your advertising material, on your websites, on your business cards. That will be huge in terms of marketing for your business, to show that you care, that you're lead safe. So this is a big deal for contractors. First of all, don't get caught not having the certification. The fines are, they've had a inflation increase, so I can't say the exact number, but it's around $40,000 per violation per day. Potentially. They don't have to charge you that much, but they can. There are folks from EPA here at this conference today. You can chat with them about it, and certainly reach out to me, and I'm happy to help you both find the certification. If one of our classes doesn't work for you, we'll help you find one that does. Also, to give you all the information about it. So contractors, get certified, learn, and if you want to do full abatement, that's a 4-day class. There's a little bit more involved in that. That's about $650 or so. Then you're certified just here in New Hampshire. But again, there is a terrible shortage of abatement contractors in New Hampshire right now. We definitely need more. So if you're looking for a line of work that has growth potential, this is it. Lead is not going anywhere very soon, sadly. So this law is a good thing for contractors, I believe, in terms of generating work and generating awareness. But get certified, don't get fined. Now, landlords, this is the trickiest part. For landlords, obviously, we want to take care of kids. Obviously, we don't want children getting poisoned in our units, but the expense is frightening, particularly when we add the piece where if a kid gets poisoned and that unit becomes vacant, you can't re-rent it. This is where the grant programs are your friend. Honestly, I've been at this since the early 2000s. I have never seen so much money as we have right now in New Hampshire to take care of this problem. So go to our exhibit hall and get a brochure, or reach out to me later and I'll get you a brochure. There is money everywhere. In Nashua, they have their own program just for the city of Nashua. In Manchester, they have their own program. In Sullivan County, will now have theirs, just starting up, brand new, very exciting. And New Hampshire Housing has a program that funds the rest of the state. And my company works directly with New Hampshire Housing. We can help you. I can help you fill out those applications. I can answer your questions about it. And as a landlord myself, I understand your concerns. So let's talk. Let's talk. If we haven't met, we should meet. If you're a landlord of the state, let's talk. Because this is something that's not going away. The likelihood, I'll tell you one thing that happens with landlords often when I talk to them. They will say, oh, I raised my kids in that house and they're fine. All right. How many years ago and how much more deteriorated is that paint? The other thing they will say is, I've had tenants in there for 30 years. I've never had a problem, right? Only 15% of the state was tested. Now they are all going to be tested. Give me a call. Let's talk about your liability. It is huge. I would rather talk with you before about the possibilities instead of have you call me after you've received a letter from the state and a letter from a lawyer. Believe me, it gets a lot more expensive then. And there's money here to help you. You do not have to be under order to access these funds. This is great. This program is phenomenal. So let me just switch to this slide here. We can help in a lot of these areas, and I'm happy to do that. We can help you get grant funding. We can help you get certification. We can help consult. And much like a lawyer, you know, our first call is always free. So give me a call or shoot me an email, and let's talk about this problem here in the state. We have a lot of resources, a lot of answers, and a lot of positive people. This team in the state is it's just phenomenal. Right now, we have a great group of people, caring, dedicated, but also realistic about what can be done and what it takes for you to do it. So I'm going to thank you so much for your time. I want to remind you that there's still more sessions afterwards, and the recordings will be available here afterwards as well. And go visit the exhibits, and let me know if there's any questions I can answer for you in the next few minutes before they shut us off.
Thank you, Kate. That was a very informative presentation. So we can now move into the question and answer portion of the session. So if you have a question, please write it in the Q&A box. But while we're waiting for some folks to put some questions in, Kate, I had a question. So you said that, you know, you teach the lead abatement contractor classes. What are the barriers that you notice that contractors may face to becoming lead safe certified? So if it's not overly expensive and it's only one day, why doesn't everybody do it?
So really good question, Angela. Thanks. There's two different levels of certification. So the one day is just for general renovation. This might be, I'm flipping over an apartment between tenants. I'm just going to paint and neaten things up, or I'm going to, you know, change out some old windows. This is where the focus is not lead. The focus is renovation. But I learn how to work around the lead once I run into it. I learn how to test for it and how to handle it when I run into it. So that's the one day. The 4-day is really a much more intensive and much more detailed course. Obviously, it's a lot more material. When you finish that course, you are actually a lead abatement contractor. The difference between renovation and abatement is kind of, you know, it's vast and huge, and more than we can go into right here. But the short version is abatement is, my focus is I start with a lead report. I remove or cover permanently all the lead. And when I'm done, an inspector comes in and certifies that I have a 20-year safe property. So that's an abatement. So the abatement contractor, I think the thing that holds them back from getting abatement certified is the 4 days. I got to take 4 days off work and get into class. And then I've got to take a test at the state, and that feels scary. You know, what if I don't test well? But after that, I will tell you, there's no particular, you know, you don't need a lot of extra tools or extra, you know, equipment or anything like that. You just need to maintain your certification by doing a recertification course every year. You don't ever have to test again. We've just changed the laws. You only test one time. So the testing part has gotten easier, but you do have to recert every year. So I think it's just another licensing, you know, hassle and expense for folks, but really it's not difficult. And I think what keeps people from doing it is just that they don't have the knowledge. They think it's worse than it is.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. I think sometimes they don't understand I think sometimes they don't understand the value either. There's a lot of work. We have a backlog of abatement jobs waiting for contractors right now. So once we get contractors up to speed and they start working with the grant programs, there's a pretty steady supply of work for them.
Okay. And so just a reminder, if you have any questions for Kate, to please put them in the Q&A box. And then Kate, also too, so what further improvements would you like to see made to Senate Bill 247 in the future?
Well, that's a good question. I think, you know, Senate Bill 247 is a great step. It really is a great step. But I think until we are testing all the kids, not just 1- and 2-year-olds, we're really not addressing the problem. 3-year-olds get poisoned too, and 5-year-olds. You know, there's a lot of controversy about this whole brain development piece. The reason we test kids only up to age 6 is we know that that's the primary time that children's brains are developing. But, you know, lead poisoning is a problem for adults as well as children. In fact, I'm going to talk about that quite a bit in my next session. Many times adults don't realize that we get lead poisoned too, and the symptoms are pretty significant for us. In fact, I'm working on another TED Talk about that right now, and that's a big part of the book about childhood lead poisoning. I want to start with saying, are you lead poisoned as an adult? Because we should all be getting tested. When you take your child in to get tested, you should get tested as well. Many times the reason the child is poisoned is because mom or dad is bringing the lead dust home from work. Mom or dad might be poisoned themselves and not even know it. So I think the whole, it's a family affair, right? Lead poisoning is a family affair. We should all be getting tested, and not just the children. And in fact, insurers will pay for that as well. So I'd love to see every child get tested at least once a year up to age 6, and preferably even older.
Great, thanks, Kate. So this was a really informative presentation. And if anyone has any further questions, please put it in the Q&A box and we can reach out to you after the session, or Kate has her contact information there at the bottom of her slide. And so the next session begins at 10:20.
Yep, and I'll be there talking more about lead poisoning for children and adults. So love to see you there. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.